Good day, dear strategists and possible new viewers. Today we have the joy of being able to welcome Dr. Sebastian Bae from the Georgetown University WarGaming Society, as well as CNA Corporation, a non-profit focusing on research and analysis for national safety and security. Dear Sebastian, thanks for taking the time and welcome here.
I appreciate you having me on here.
To get started, I would ask you to introduce yourself and elaborate a little on what you have been working on as well as your works on today's interview topic. To hopefully formulate it quite simple, you are one of the leading professionals in simulating geopolitical scenarios with focus on military operations as well as campaigns, while also having developed your own models, games, and are regularly supervising war games for the US as well as its allies. Did I encompass it correctly, and would you please elaborate in your own words?
Yeah, absolutely. So you hit the marks, broad strokes. I am a senior game designer at the Center for Naval Analysis, which is a federally funded research and development center for the U.S. government. We predominantly work for the U.S. Navy and the U.S. Marine Corps, but we do work broadly for the U.S. Joint Force on a myriad of topics, everything from humanitarian disaster relief to traditional studies and analysis on geopolitical and foreign policy, but also on military operations. I also teach a game design course at the Georgetown Center for Security Studies, where my students will design and research original educational game for a sponsor, which they will deliver as part of their final, which I'm currently teaching right now. And I previously served in the U.S. Marine Corps as a sergeant and left. I left several years ago.
But gladly you stayed in the industry. Thank you very much to address why we approached you, as so much it's multifaceted, while wargaming will play a significant role in this channel's future as well. So, as touched on in my October 7th Israeli Intelligence, Security and Leadership Failures series, and later mentioned in a following interview with a speaker of the IDF, there's a principle called the 10th Man, coined by filmmakers Mel Brooks' son and author of World War Z, historian Max Brooks.
The reason he's here is because I think he truly understands the potential for global crisis and just how unprepared we might be.
What it really should be called is World War Z, insert real plague here. Because what I tried to do was make it a metaphor for the threats that we will be facing and the threats that we're facing right now.
Whom suggests that the principle was created after 1967, which basically is a post which has to look and prepare for the possibility that everyone else's consensus is wrong. A sort of devil's advocate or pessimist on duty, if you will. So your work especially nurtures critical thinking and provides possibilities to identify possible black swans in a relatively inexpensive as well as safe-to-fail environment, correct?
Broadly, the one exception I will say to some of that is games are designed for a myriad of purposes. Sometimes they are designed exactly what you described, is to explore non-consensus scenarios, right? Or to pursue like out-of-the-box problem solving or experimentation or exploration of an unknown problem set, right? So back when cyber warfare became a thing, there were several games that were done to explore like, what does escalation look like in this new domain, right? That we didn't know what people or how people would react to cyber attacks of various kinds, right? Mm-hmm. Similarly, right, some games are designed to look at the most sort of obvious problem, because the obvious problem is the thing they are worried about, right? Yes. A very common example in this space is like the DPRK problem set for the ROC-US alliance, right? That alliance predominantly looks at that problem set, right? In a traditional like, hey, how do we defeat or defend or deter nuclear aggression and also like conventional military operations from the north to the south, right? Mm-hmm. And then other times games are designed to educate like students or even staffs, right, on a problem that they may not be familiar with, or about allies and partners, or to educate allies and partners on a problem set that they're not familiar with or just exploring, right? So games are used for a myriad of reasons. They are games specifically designed to be devil's advocate or to look at or attempt to look at black swans, right? Is where they try to do atypical scenarios or atypical laydowns, or to do variations of force design on forces, or even different, or to challenge core assumptions, right, about the geopolitical landscape that will affect how, policies are executed, or how military operations are executed in the real world.
Highly fascinating. I saw some of your other lectures, and yes, I didn't get the 5 points of the different uses for war games out of memory right now, but I will definitely feature some regarding presentations of yours. And as a member of the U.S. Combined Arms Doctrine Directorate pointed out in a regarding lecture at the Georgetown University WarGaming Society's YouTube channel, which got featured in my videos on the military decision-making process, such individuals who regularly engage in wargames seem to be able to adapt quite quicker to new circumstances and tasks, as well as coming up with courses of action. Can you confirm this and maybe give us your own observations and possible some anecdotes on this?
So Mike Dunn from Command General Staff College out of Fort
Correct.
Leavenworth does a great presentation for our webinar series at Georgetown. I highly recommend it to anyone who's interested in sort of what we call COA development, COA games, right? Looking in supports of NDMP. And broadly, I would say games are powerful as learning tools and educational tools because they're a form of active learning. When we think about a pedagogy and adult learning theory, we know that combination or compilation that complement passive and active learning is the best, right?
Exactly.
So like active learning is something like staff rides, games, exercises, right? In terms of doing real military exercises out in sea, in the air, or with real physical platforms, doing your actual skills, right? Which are often mislabeled as war games in the popular press. But that is also combined with passive learning in terms of like reading, listening to a lecture, right? Group discussions in some ways, right? Depending on how active you are in that group discussion. So often you have to combine these methods to be able to produce true, what we call sticky retention, right? Where you're able to retain the information. We have all sat through lectures at school, at uni, or even at our jobs where we walk out and we're like, oh, I don't know what happened in the last hour and a half of my life, right? Because you have not participated, or it was too passive, right?
Yes.
In some ways, way PME schools or professional military education school houses like CGSC, Naval War College, Marine Corps War College, and others try to incorporate active modes of learning is to help them through games to really wrestle with it, right? There's a great article several years old now by Jim Lacey, who used to teach at War College down at Marine Corps University, and he discusses how he would teach a class on like the Peloponnesian War and so forth, and his students who would always do the armchair like discussion of like, I would have done it differently, why would I invade Syracuse, blah 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 blah, right? And they're able to make those sort of like long distance separated from the context of the decision. And then he goes like, I have them play Polis, which is a game about the Peloponnesian War. And he's like, they make the same decision. They always end up invading Syracuse, right? Because in the moment, right, you understand what drove their decision space, right? Out of desperation to end the war quickly, right? It was a big gambit. And almost every time they lose that gambit, but they always think they're going to be the one that turns the tide with their invasion of Syracuse, right? So those are one of the ways that games allow us to take ownership or agency of our decisions. And that back and forth is what makes games so alluring, both emotionally and intellectually, because you're wrestling with decisions internal to yourself, but also with someone else. If you and I are playing a game, we're pushing back and forth about our decisions. If I make a move, you're going to be thinking, oh, why did he make that move, and so forth, right? That can be from everything from an abstract game like chess, or to a more tactical, operational, reflective game that we play on the board at PME schoolhouses.
Highly fascinating and quite the interesting story. I was also looking at it from a perspective of, let's call it priming, because recently at Enforstag I also ran into Sandra Sommer, which is a regarding lecturer on PTBS prevention and coping. And for example, she also acknowledged that if we put persons into a regarding situation or make them process it in their mind beforehand, we have some chances of raising, how to say, PTBS resistance or resilience. And especially in regards of, yeah, I already went through that in my head, in that what is challenging me right now. We definitely both should have some experiences from our past military trainings. For example, I'm not getting shot in regards of guard duty once again because of the mistake I made that one time in the training. So one of the still somewhat sad aspects is that the military professionals wargaming community stayed quite small, which is also why we are here to promote this to a wider audience. Can you give us some recommendations where to start as an aspiring newcomer, and also point out who might be especially welcome as so far non-professional, finishing where contributions and, for example, volunteering might be most welcome?
Um, I will say I get this question all the time, and to this day, after several years of trying to answer this question, I do not think I produce a satisfactory answer for everybody. Because I think the nature of the answer itself is disappointing when honest, which is um, it's hard to break into our field. Just in terms of professional wargaming, it is a niche field of a high demand, low density community, and there is no pipeline. I wrote about this a couple years ago in More of the Rocks and other places about there is no talent pipeline to build wargamers and how to forge wargamers, right? This partly because, like, unlike traditional disciplines, there's very few of us, right? So
Yes.
even the United States, there's probably 100 of us, right? And of that 100, like the true core of that community is probably like 40, right? Less than half, right? And there's a cataclysmic demographic cliff that we're going to hit as a community, as the vast majority of that 100 is uh, on the older end because we used to be an inverted pyramid. But there are still no great entry points, right, for our field. This is changing in some places, right? Like Europe is actually a fascinating growth area for wargaming. Currently, the UK, DSTL, and other places, French wargaming is growing massively. I was just at the Paris Strategy Defense Forum a few weeks ago, where I met, and I was surprised, honestly, by the nature of how many wargamers. I mean, I say I was surprised, but there was like maybe 30, 40 of us, but that's more than I expected. I was like expecting like 7, right? So like to have that many people there with games that they're designed, with efforts that they're informing for the French wargaming community and the defense community was amazing. So there are areas of growth, and obviously depending on how big your country's defense sector itself is, right, is also often a good measure of how big your wargaming demand could be, right?
Yes.
I will also caveat that in the sense that there is a even smaller niche field than broad wargaming, where there's professional gaming that supports non-DoD or non-defense issues, right? Emergency crisis management. There's a very small field about business gaming as well, right? What we call corporate gaming and other things. So there are other branches of this sort of community in the professional gaming space. But in terms of breaking in, it is often a couple ways. One is that you work in the defense community of your country or NATO or of alliance naturally, and then you convert laterally into the gaming field, right? So more than half of our team here at CNA were not trained gamers when they started their careers, right? We became wargamers. I'm probably one of the few exceptions where I started almost my entire postgraduate school career in gaming. And I did the other way. So I did a little bit of analysis and so forth along the way, but I started my career at the Marine Corps Warfighting, the Warfighting Labs Wargaming Division, and then I went to RAND to do wargaming and analysis, and I went to CNA to do the same, right? So I pretty much have been doing wargaming my entire career as my principal job, but that's the rarity. Most will laterally move. So I would say to work, if you want to work in our field, is to try to find a job in the defense field that's close to wargaming, eventually in operations, operational research science, or just defense analysis, and eventually try to migrate your way over. That's the most common. The other is to go through a small blossoming sort of pipeline that's happening in different places. So there are few new places of entry that will give you wargaming experiences in school as a civilian as you try to pursue a career in wargaming. The best known examples are obviously Georgetown, where I teach a class, right? King's College, where David Banks teaches a class and does a certificate program out of King's. Brunel just started a program looking at professional gaming. There are other handful of other places on the civilian side, like MIT, Stanford also have similar opportunities, if not set up programs. On the professional military side, if you're coming from uniform, whether you're in Europe or in the US, there are a couple other opportunities. If you're a US service member trying to do wargaming, there are more opportunities as like Naval Postgraduate School, Naval War College, Army War College, Marine Corps University, all have opportunities for you to participate in gaming, do wargaming courses, or have more exposure to games. Across the pond in Europe, right, there are also increasing opportunities in NATO. So the big players in NATO wargaming are NATO ACT, or Allied Command Transformation, down at Norfolk, Virginia, but also at NATO Shape, right, which I believe is based in Mons, right? And there are a couple other places, but those are the two major hubs. And then obviously in most large NATO states, there are growing, if not nascent wargaming efforts. Like the UK is probably the most established, and then the French are quickly behind. And then there are actually pretty robust gaming in the Scandinavian countries. Swedish Defense University has a pretty awesome wargaming component to that university if you attend there. And then the Germans are also doing a re-embracement of wargaming, both in the Bundeswehr, as they have adapted even my own Littoral Commander to their own game, right? And they're doing some very cool experimentations with AI and other types of gaming. And they have developed their own games for use for the German military. Italy is also trying to do more of it. And then Poland is just starting its efforts to establish gaming within its community for defense. So there's a lot of exciting things across, but it's pretty scattered, right? And depends where you're listening this to, where your own career track is coming from, and where you want to go.
Yeah, naturally there won't be like suddenly thousands of jobs for professional gamers for basically transition of, hey, I like to play whatever in my private time, so I would like to volunteer now. But I think that the versatility you mentioned is really a big aspect, especially as we explore the crisis prevention with, for example, the Society for Crisis Prevention from Germany with their Blackout or New Start, Neustart game, for example. Jan Heinemann and Colonel Kordalle from the Innovation Laboratory also used that. And especially you were very correct in regards, pointing at Germany, as we basically are now looking to create something called Operationsplan Germany, where especially everything in regards of critical infrastructure is bound into a more, how to say, transdisciplinary or trans departments and civilian military cooperation network of defense. And because of all the other different uses of war games, I think it's really a good time to promote it to a wider audience, as it has so many usabilities. Also, I will be exploring myself in the regards of the business competition simulation, as you touched on. So, dear Sebastian, many thanks for your time, as well as these intriguing elaborations. Keep up the good work, stay healthy, as well as aware, and take care.
I appreciate it. Thank you for having me on.